We want to welcome into the studio on this Veterans Day Hewitt Gomez and Brigadier General Robert Leblanc, two of the true heroes of World War II. We thank you both, gentlemen, for coming in and being with us today and telling an amazing story about the very beginning of our intelligence services under, wasn't it Wild Bill Donovan? Yeah, the OSS. Yes. Hewitt, you were in the air. The general was on the ground. You were dropping supplies to the French resistance, and the general was working with the French resistance. What an amazing story you two have to tell. I'm going to let Hewitt start off because when Hewitt received the French Legion of Honor, and I think, Brigadier, you did also, did you not? Yes, yeah. Exactly. Both of them did for their service to the nation of France and, of course, to the world in saving it from the horrible scourge of Nazism and Hitler. But Hewitt, you were a navigator. How old were you?
19.
You were 19 years old. Okay, so you enlisted, correct?
I volunteered as soon as I made 18.
Mm-hmm.
I went was then the U.S. Air Corps, and I got an honorable discharge about 2 months later because they changed the name, the United States Air Force. Then when I was commissioned a navigator, I got another honorable discharge. And then at the end of the war, I got a third honorable discharge. I'm really discharged honorably.
Discharged 3 times honorably. Hey.
Right.
But anyway, so when this particular mission came up, how did this come about?
Well, General Eisenhower was such a great general, and he realized a head of Overlord, Operations Overlord, which everyone knows now as D-Day, he realized that after the foothold was made by our forces, if we had support from the rear of the Germans, like being armed by the Air Force, dropping supplies to the
resistance on the ground.
Marquis, as they were called, or the resistance forces. So the British government was doing this already, so he sent he put Bill O'Donovan in charge of the job, and O'Donovan sent our commanding officer.
Yeah, well, that was surprising. When I read about, I decided to do a little research. I've heard your story, but I went on to WikiLeaks, and they said it was the Royal Air Force that you all were working with initially.
They started it, and they taught us how to do it. So Colonel Robert Fish was our commanding officer, and he flew some missions with the Royal Air Force to learn. So when we got off the train, and we thought we were going into a group that were going to drop bombs from 30,000 feet.
Got off the train where?
That's the only training we had.
You got off the train in Britain?
At Harrington Field in England.
In England.
So we were called into a meeting, and the commanding officer said, "Gentlemen, you've been selected to serve in a highly secretive and dangerous operations. You're not to tell your mother, your father, your wife, no one, not what type of airplane you're going to be flying, et cetera, et cetera." So everyone didn't know except the Germans. They knew because when we flew over them, they were shooting like hell at us. So we had to go through 3 more weeks of special training because we'd never done this before. And it was special because what we were doing, we were going to fly at night, moonlit nights only, and drop.
So wait, no lights on the aircraft, nothing?
Nothing, only in my compartment. I was curtained in with the only light in the airplane, and the airplane was painted black so that it could be concealed. So the bombardier had to learn new tactics with his bomb. What was that? Bombs, Norton? Yeah. Well, he had to learn, instead of dropping from 25 or 30,000 feet, dropping from 500 feet. And there's a difference in the calculations there. And the navigator had to learn to do more dead reckoning. And here the navigator had the help of the bombardier.
So no GPS or any of this computer stuff or anything like that.
We had long range.
You had to calculate.
Right. We had long range. But because of the low level, and they took the nose guns out of the B-24 and built a bench for the bombardier to sit on, and a plexiglass surrounding, so he could see a lot. And he was the eyes of me, the navigator. So I would draw him a course on a map just like mine, and I'd say, "Do you see what looks like a lake size of a baby foot. I see it as 5 degrees off. So everything I would ask for, he would tell me where it was, and then we're on course. And, of course, as we were talking out in the hall a while ago, when the committee that was waiting for our drop would hear the engines, they would light fires, mostly 3 fires in a row, so that we would not miss them. And also, there was a code to be given with flashlight, Morse code, and they would give the signal, we'd answer back. The bombardier would.
Now, this is behind German lines.
Oh, yes. Over France, and then later on Denmark, and then later on Norway. So there were also some drops in Belgium, wasn't there, Bob? Yes. So,
wow.
The general said because of these drops made to the underground, that France was liberated in more than 6 months ahead of schedule. In other words, France was liberated within 6 weeks after D-Day, and it was due to the resistance forces having ammunition, supplies to blow up bridges so that the Germans couldn't reinforce, and to also kill.
Yeah, exactly.
Shoot from behind while they were busy trying to shoot our men from the front.
Right. We're gonna take we're not gonna take a break yet. I want to get Brigadier General Robert Joseph Leblanc from Vermilion Parish, also a living legend, has been named a living legend by the Acadian Museum. I am so honored to have you, and you were there at the International Center when Hewitt received his Medal of Honor, his French Legion of Honor. But you received yours a couple of years before that.
Before.
Yes.
I received mine before, and it was as a result of some work I did in Vermilion Parish. The French envoy came there, and he presented it to me. But going back to what he was telling you, the main thing was to get equipment and to get personnel in the right place so they could do the right thing for us.
So, but tell me this. When you enlisted, how old were you?
I was 21 years old.
You were 21. And so, you younger than that? You say your daughter is saying you were younger. But anyway, so you were 21, and where did you go from here? Where did they send you first?
First they sent me to I got interviewed at where I was with training, and that was at Fort McClellan, Alabama.
Okay.
And at Fort McClellan, Alabama, the person who was writing your qualifications put me down for knowing how to read, write, and speak French. And this was something that I had to live with all the time I was in the Army. First of all,
they tease you?
When they were trying to invade North Africa, they needed somebody who knew how to censor mail. Well, they sent me to a censorship school. I came back from the censorship school. I went to Fort Benning to do my infantry work, which was my primary concern. And when I got back, there was an individual that called me in, and my battalion commander said, "What kind of trouble are you in?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "They want you up at headquarters." He says, "You got to be in trouble." He said, "Let's go. We're going to bathe you. We're going to put you in clean clothes, and we're going to bring you up there." So we went up there, and they made him leave. And there was one individual there in a civilian uniform. And he started this spiel. And he says, "Would you be willing to volunteer for a special mission, which might include dropping out of an airplane and taking care of French people or other people?" I said, "Well, tell me more about it." He says, "I can't tell you any more than that." He said, "I want one answer from you. Are you willing or are you not willing?" I said, "Well, everything at the Army, they catch your orders, and I do it. He said, that's not what I asked you. I want to know if you're willing. I says, okay, I'm willing. So the next thing I knew, I was up at Camp David. You know where Camp David is today.
Yes, I do.
Well, Camp David at that time was the training area for OSS. So I went there. I was called, and I got an order a special order from Washington, D.C.
General, let me stop you right there. We have a lot of young people listening, and they have no idea what OSS is. Office
of Strategic Service.
There you go.
Okay. You go. So they put me in. They put me in this Camp David, and they started training me just like as though I would be dropping in the area of Jedburghs.
Mm-hmm.
And I did everything that the Jedburghs. I trained like a Jedburghs all the way through. Later on, they said, well, we need 15 people who can interpret to the French what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And we want them at the corps and at the division level. So 35 of us went up there, and guess who was one? Me.
Of course.
So then I became a corps liaison officer. And my job was to make sure that everything that pertained to that particular mission was done correctly, either by me going across the line or by me training people what they had to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I did.
Well, when you were dropped behind enemy lines, how did that go? I mean,
I never was dropped behind enemy lines.
How did you get there?
Walk through.
Serious?
Walk through. There were many ways to go from the American line to the French line. One thing was to get a Frenchman who knew which way to bring you,
mm-hmm.
go give the instructions, and come back in.
So you kind of blend into the populace there. Yeah, what I saw in a film that was made by, was it Pat Meir? Yes.
Yeah,
Pat
you
Meir.
saw that, Meir?
Yeah, I did.
I was in that.
Yes, you were. And the thing that interested me was that they chose specifically people from South Louisiana because the accent and the patois was the same as in Poitou, and you would blend in better than anybody from Canada or real Canadian French or anything like that. You sounded like the people from that region, and that's why they chose you all.
I was sitting with some Frenchmen one day, and there was an old lady there, and I used the word "asteur" instead of "acteur," and they all laughed when I said "asteur." So she says, "What are you laughing about?" She says, "When I was young, I said the very same thing." And this was in the Loire Valley, and the Loire Valley was very conducive to the type of people that came out of South Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you get the Parisian French, it's totally different than what we were trained to utilize in France with the French underground.
Now, both of y'all, I want to ask you, what year was this? 42, 43?
43.
Yeah.
43.
Right. Okay, we're going to have to take a break, but we're going to come back. We're going to continue this story because I want to hear from the air what you all went through, and then from the ground what the general went through. And I can't tell you how honored we are to have Hewitt Leblanc. I'm looking at Leblanc. Brigadier General Robert Leblanc and Hewitt Gomez. Well, now, you were a captain or a navigator? First lieutenant.
Mm-hmm.
First lieutenant.
Very important individual.
Hewitt Gomez. Yes, he was. And you were too.
He had to get us there.
We're going to be right back on the Ross Report and just celebrating Veterans Day with two true American heroes. Stay with us. We'll be right back. We're back on the Ross Report. Welcome back on this Veterans Day, a very special program with First Lieutenant Hewitt Gomez and Brigadier General Robert Leblanc, both of whom served their country so honorably and helped save the world from the scourge of Nazism. We're getting their firsthand accounts of some very dangerous operations that they did. Hewitt's group was called the Carpetbaggers, and they were enlisted by the forerunner of the CIA, which was the Office of Special Strategic Services, and Brigadier General was on the ground. So, Hewitt, when you were doing these runs, what would you see? I mean, you wouldn't see anything, but they would tell you what the topography was.
Yes, I got over kind of late because I was a younger person. France had already been liberated, so I didn't make any missions over France. Mine were over Denmark and Norway. So we flew over the ocean, the North Sea,
Channel,
the North Sea,
the Channel, the English
and
Channel. Yeah.
all of a sudden, the top turret gunner said, "There's an orange ball on our right wing, and it's followed every time we make a move. It follows us." So I said, I'm trying to stay on course. Take a 90-degree turn to the left. The ball is still on our right wing. And he hollered, and everybody was concerned. So the co-pilot says, take your eyes off of that because it may be the Germans are trying to have you look at that while they attack from the backside.
Yeah.
Well, that wasn't true. If you look it up in the Google, it's called the foo-foo balls, and even the Germans saw it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was told to us later after the war that it was magnetic.
Some kind of resonance, magnetic resonance or something.
Yeah. But why only one night? We flew nights every time we got up in the airplane.
Yeah.
We only saw it the one time. So we still don't know what it was.
Yeah.
Okay, so
when you would get over there, though, and what would you see what did they see on the ground? And how did they know where to drop, and how did you make your calculations?
Oh, that's a good question now. The way we found out where our target area was, there was an airplane called the Mosquito. It was a light plane built of plywood, and it could fly up to 40,000 feet at a good speed. And General Leblanc mentioned the Jedburghs. The Jedburghs were a group of three men. One was a trained radio operator. Mm-hmm. One could speak French and the other German, right, Bob? So they made up a team called the Jedburghs. They trained at the Congressional...
Camp David. They started at Camp David.
But they trained right out of
Washington. Congressional
Air Force
Country Club.
The
Country
Golf Club.
Oh, the golf club.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That was just in the news the other day. Yeah. Okay, so that's where they trained.
The radio operator would be amongst the citizens of Denmark or Norway or in France, and he would radio a message giving coordinates of where would be a safe place to have a drop. And this radio message would be received way up in the air in this Mosquito airplane, who would then radio the locations to the main headquarters in England. Then they would in turn call my base and the other bases and assign not just one drop, but 40 or 50 drops in one night.
Wow.
And the first one to be notified was the navigator. So I would be called in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to plot a course for those coordinates. Mm-hmm. And then the part of that is looking at the maps. The British had better maps than I ever saw in the United States. They outlined every tree line and everything. And they had on these maps flak stations. Mm-hmm. Now, flak is a bomb that is set off and explodes in the air, throwing shrapnel metal to take down our airplanes. So my job was to try to avoid going near those. Yeah. And on the worst mission that I encountered, I was going into Denmark, and I saw a river coming out, so I figured, well, a river's going to be 100, 200 feet wide. We're going to go right down the middle of it to avoid the flak stations, which I saw on the right and the left. Mm-hmm. Well, I told the pilot every time we crossed the court,
the channel,
climb up to 5,000 feet and dive over that crossing because that's where the flak stations were. Now we're going, instead of 265 miles an hour, like maybe 400 miles an hour.
Oh, my gosh.
Well, as we ended over that river, all hell broke loose, and a big light hit our airplane so that the gunners could find us. The tracer bullets were coming at us, and when we landed, we found 4 or 5 holes in the fuselage.
Wow.
And the flak was exploding all around, lighting up the sky. So that was a scary moment. But we survived that and found the target, made our drop, and got back. Norway, I'd like to speak a little bit later about Norway.
Yeah.
Because I don't think many people in the United States
Knew
know
what was going on over
that
there.
Norway was a target. But I made 4 drops in Norway, and that's where we encountered the orange ball going on one of those.
Let's save that for later. Let's bring in General LeBlanc.
Okay, let's talk about dropping the people on the ground.
Yeah.
When Colonel Laurent, who was in charge of 3 of those districts, and I became real good friends, he asked for a drop for his underground. First of all, they would not drop in American land, any type that Americans control. We had to go behind the lines, behind the German lines, to be able to get a drop. So we went out there, and the plane came over, and we had everything organized, including all of the lights and everything. And they dropped the drop right where we asked them to. We took the drop, we loaded them up in some horses and mules and everything
Oxen.
to pull them out, and brought them out of the area, and put them out to the different units that needed them. But this is a very hazardous thing, to go behind the lines, knowing that you're going to receive a drop, and then what you had to do is get this equipment out of there and bring it
As
back
fast
into
as
the
you could,
lines
right?
where you needed them.
Yeah.
So that was the one drop that I was involved in, and I'll tell you, when they told me you got to go behind the lines to get a drop, that scared the living hell out of me.
Yeah, I guess.
Well,
so.
I've said many times that as afraid as I was, and I'm willing to admit that I was fearful of my life, but I was more worried about those people on the ground, because I knew there were Germans all around them, as you just mentioned, and that was very hazardous. And
They had to hear your plane coming, though. Huh?
absolutely, and there are a number of drops that never ended up in the Frenchmen or the Danish people's hands. The Germans shot them dead on the spot, and they recovered. And when we talk about a drop, we're talking about parachutes dropping 12 containers, about 13 feet long, and
Wow. They were that big?
oh yes, they were long, and they were in Bombay, and they were dropped. But in the Joe hole that was mentioned earlier, packages were dropped. Maybe it would be money.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, we dropped $25,000 to the underground in Belgium, Denmark. I'm sorry. So yeah, the Germans were all over the place, and like I said, we were secret except to the Germans. They knew every move we were going to make.
They really did?
Oh, absolutely.
Let me tell you a little story about this drop. There was white silk parachutes on some of this equipment. I took one of these white silk parachutes and cut it off of the thing, and I threw it in my Jeep, and I brought it home when I came home. When I got home, my wife was pregnant when I went to China, and my mother took this thing and made a christening dress out of it.
Oh, my
and
goodness.
That christening dress is still being used for every one of my great-grandchildren.
I got the free, I'm telling you, I got the free song right now.
and I have a picture of it in here. But Denise,
You were baptized in that?
she's
I'll
getting
be
the
darned.
names. She's getting the names printed inside the slip of this dress.
Oh, how beautiful.
And that little dress is still being used. And my sister got a First Communion dress made out of the same.
Yeah, because those parachutes were huge. They had to be huge.
Same parachute, and she is baptized, christening all of her children on that same.
What a beautiful
dress.
story. That is a beautiful story. We're going to take a break right now because I know Hewitt wants to talk a little bit about what was going on in Norway at the time. And I'm just so thrilled to have both of you in the studio with us. All All right, we are back on the Ross Report, a very special edition of the Ross Report on this Veterans Day 2017 with Brigadier General Robert Leblanc of Abbeville and First Lieutenant Hewitt Gomez, both of whom served in a very secret operation during World War II. The Carpetbaggers was the name of Hewitt's group, and they made drops, and Brigadier General Leblanc was on the ground with the French resistance. And Hewitt, you wanted to talk about what was going on in Norway, because not a lot of people knew what was going on in Norway at the time.
I doubt that 1 out of 1,000,000 people know that Norway was occupied with 175,000 German troops. The reason they were there, Hitler was protecting the heavy water that Norway had, and heavy water is used to make atomic bombs. They had the atomic bomb before we did, but didn't use it. So the reason I'm bringing this up is that the Carpetbaggers dropped 32 skiers, trained skiers dressed all in white, and they skied for 10 hours with a 70-pound backpack on their back, blowing up ports and bridges and whatever to retain those troops, keep them in Norway, because Hitler, at this point, March of 45, needed them very badly because the Allied forces had crossed into Germany. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he was having to defend the country with grandpas and teenagers. So this was very important to keep those troops there, 175,000. Now, the leader of the 32 that were dropped was Major William Colby. Now, some of you may remember he became the CIA director.
Yeah.
And I'm bringing this up because we had our records sealed for 45 years, every one of us that were involved with this OSS, these missions. And they were sealed because there was fear that collaborators after the war would get onto us and kill us. Now, if you can remember, a couple of years ago, William Colby told his wife he was going fishing.
Yes.
He got into his boat, didn't come back. They found his boat overturned and his body later on. They said it was suicide. This was a man of honor, one of the best military men ever put on the uniform, would never take his life. He wouldn't have turned his boat over.
He was one of the Jedburghs in my area.
That's right.
Kidding.
He was a wonderful person. I didn't know him in person, but he was on my base.
So there was a reason for them not declassifying until the mid-'80s, a good reason for it.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. So that's the reason. But
and since then, Hewitt has told me you've gone to many reunions, but less and less and fewer and fewer and fewer people each year.
I just got back from last week's reunion in Gulf Breeze, Florida, near Herbert Field. Herbert Field now has a 492nd wing, and my group was the original 492nd group. They treat us like we were kings because we're their grandpas and they're our grandchildren.
How many in your unit are left?
Well, they put us on stage, and there were 9 of us. Wow. There are probably another 15, but they're older
not
and
able to
can't
travel.
That's correct.
You had more than that
not
when you came to New Orleans.
Yeah, that's right. And how many from your unit, General, still alive?
I know of none that are alive.
I'll be darned.
As a matter of fact, I was looking for some data, and I can't find the data because the data was lost some kind of way.
Okay, what was the name of your unit? We'll put our crack researchers on it.
Well, it was I was part of Patton's headquarters.
Oh, okay.
In a G3 section, and my job was to liaison between the G3 section and the Jedburghs that were on the ground, or the resistance that was on the ground, and what was going to happen when we attacked, what we needed them to do, and what was necessary to do.
You knew Patton?
I met him a couple of times. I met him one time when a driver walked in with a Jeep with the glass windshield straight up, and it was not covered. And so he had one of his people knock it flat and jump on it and break the glass. And he says, "Now charge him." You don't think that my canvas was always over my glass?
Yeah, exactly. I guess so. All right. Hugh,
I have some statistics.
statistics.
The carpetbaggers, we were talking about drops. They were actually sorties. We did 3,000 sorties over France,
Yikes.
Denmark, and Norway.
Yikes.
We dropped 556 agents, spies, both men and women. The men were called Joes and the gals called Josephines. Night bombing missions also came out of the carpetbaggers, 21 of those, and a complement of B-24s. The total number were 89 B-24s in our group. We lost 208 of our personnel. 197 of those were killed in action, 11 in training, and we lost 26 airplanes.
Wow.
Yep.
Not bad. 89? 26 from 89. That's not bad.
Not bad, not
For
bad.
considering the kind of action that you
And
all
they weren't
saw.
shot down. Most of our airplanes ran into mountains or trees.
That's what I was going to
We were
say.
at such low level
Yeah, right. So you were at 500 feet at some points.
most of the time, over enemy
Yikes.
territory, most of the time.
He did one thing, but the Air Force did something else. That was close air support.
Oh, okay. And what does that entail? Close air support.
Close air support was always having an aircraft over the column,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
so that, and then they'd rotate, and the close air support, when you needed something hit, they were right close by and could take care of it immediately.
Exactly. Okay, now about the Congressional Medal of Honor. Yeah. You say that this has already been there. How many did you say? About 100 remaining veterans
Well,
from
that's
World
what
War
my
II?
daughter read someplace. There was
Uh-huh.
about 100.
And so the Congressional Medal of Honor has been authorized, and they've been
2 years.
Okay, so what we need now is we need Congress to what? Pass on it or set
We
the
need
ceremony?
the president to make a decision to award the Congressional Medal of Honor award to those veterans who are still
Still
alive,
alive from World
and
War
to
II.
the widows and children of those veterans who participated in this
Mhm.
fracas.
I think they're waiting till a few more of us die so they don't have to hand out 100.
Oh no!
Like the French government, they waited 70 years to give us
the French Legion
French
of Honor.
Legion of Honor.
Yes.
And it was only to the living. They didn't give it to the widows of the deceased. So
Well, I want to tell
they
you,
followed suit.
I wasn't at General Leblanc's, but I was at Hewitt's, and it really was a moving ceremony to see the French government recognize the brave service that you all gave to the French at that time. I mean, it would have been easy, and in the very early days of the war, people were very resistant into getting into a war on another continent. You know, having gone through that in World War I. And so we were sort of in an isolationist period between the wars. And so Roosevelt had to pull a few strings and work really hard to get people to understand. And of course, then when we were bombed at Pearl Harbor, did either of you, you were both in the European theater? Right.
I was in the European theater and the Japanese and the Chinese theater.
Oh, you were in the Chinese theater.
Yeah.
Okay. But China, at that time, was China an ally against the Japanese?
Well,
Sort of.
they were not allied against us. There was only one faction of the Chinese government that was allied against us because I operated in an airfield, an American airfield,
Okay.
and that's where I went because
Okay.
when I left this thing here,
The European theater. Yeah.
I injured myself parachute jumping, so they put me in a
Well, the Chinese and the
photograph
Japanese,
photo unit.
the Chinese and Japanese pretty much hated each other at that time. I mean,
yes, they
there
did.
was serious enmity
Yeah,
between the two.
you had two branches of the Chinese government too.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Exactly. There was the communist kind of allied, and then there was Chiang Kai-shek, who was on our side. Okay, well, this has been just absolutely fascinating. Is there anything else you guys want to add? And by the way, we're going to try to do what we can to get Congress to move forward. If we put the public pressure on, maybe if we have all the people from South Louisiana sending, well, actually, we probably should start with our senator. I think our senators should be the ones to try to push this through, because I know we have this state. I would like to know proportionally how many people in this state have served in the armed services. And I would say that we're one of the top in the country per capita for people having served in the military. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
And absolutely, because you have a lot of them that served in OSS.
Really, way back when? Yeah.
That was in France.
Uh-huh.
They served it.
Well, I'll tell
If you saw that movie, Sam Broussard was one.
Yes, exactly.
And there
yes,
was
he
some other
certainly
ones.
Was.
But in my book, I list most of them.
Well, okay, now what's the name of your book? We need to push the book. We need to promote the book.
No.
Yeah, we do. What's the name of it?
That's the end of this book. I done published enough of them for my kids.
Oh, okay.
This is called Another Cajun Citizen, Soldier, and a Public Servant. And it covers all of my activities.
Yeah, because you were very active after your military career
yes.
as well.
I got recruited for everything.
You're just an active kind of guy, General. Well, I want to tell you, I can't tell you how much of a pleasure this has been for me. And what really spurred this on was, first of all, that Hewitt received the French Legion of Honor, and that's where I got to meet General Leblanc, and the fact that, of course, the reunions that you've gone to, that you've told us over the years about the carpetbagger
Let
reunions.
me mention that as this last reunion, since I'm the president of the Carpetbaggers organization, I was interviewed for 30 minutes and photographed, and I'm going to be in the Library of Congress as a result of that interview. And I think that's wonderful.
Wonderful. This was the last one that you just came back from.
Right,
Yeah.
Just last week.
Yeah. And so were there a lot of the younger folks there who got to understand just exactly what you all did?
Oh, yeah.
Did they understand?
We were on stage, the 9 of us, and there were 300 in the audience, and they asked a lot of questions.
Really? So it was almost like a press conference, and the whole thing is videotaped, and it's going to. Okay, now we need to know though where we can actually log on and get it, get the video. So when you find that out, Hewitt, let me know. I wonder if we could research Library of Congress. I'm going to check it out, and I'll let our listeners know exactly where to find it, because I'll bet that was some interesting information that was shared.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you both so very much. We're running out of time. This has been, for me, a really special occasion to have you both in here to talk about your experiences and maybe to share with some young folk who have never had to face this kind of decision in their lives. We're a strictly voluntary military now, and we don't have the same kind of threat that we were faced with way back when, with Hitler marching across one part of the world and the Japanese Emperor Hirohito? Yeah, Hirohito, right? Hirohito. Trying to dominate the other part of the world, and made no bones about it. It was world domination, and that was what they wanted. So to think of the bravery of young men, 18, 19, 20, 21, that saved the world. And Tom Brokaw, one time I agree with him, you were and are the greatest generation. Thank you. Thank you for your service.